Then in chapter 3 contains that famous poem about time, made popular by a group in the early 60s, the Byrds. For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted. And I won't take the time to read all of that. You're very familiar with it anyway. And in verse 11 he says, He, meaning God, has made everything beautiful in its time. And this too is sometimes a source of frustration to us, because we sometimes want and expect God to operate on our schedule. And we want Him to do things when we want Him to do things. And instead, the preacher has noted that God operates on His time schedule. And He does things at the right time. And as a result, He calls them beautiful. And then in verses 12 and 13, he repeats an earlier conclusion. I perceived that there is nothing better for them than to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. Also, that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. This is God's gift to man. And again, once we realize that God operates on His schedule and not ours, and once we accept that, life becomes a little bit easier to live, in the sense that it is less stressful for us when we will just accept the fact that God is going to operate on His schedule. And when He does, it is beautiful. And then at the end of chapter 3, he makes a couple more observations. One is, there is wickedness in the place of justice. All of us have seen stories on the news about judges being bribed to rule a certain way in a case. We've known police officers who have planted evidence, who have framed individuals. That's just an observation that the preacher has made about life. And then he makes another observation that man and beast alike will both die, and therefore man has no advantage over the beast. We're both going to die. And so what's the advantage that man has? From the aspect that we're both going to die. And so even though he noted that God will judge the righteous and the wicked, both of these observations resulted in a similar conclusion to the preacher. So I saw that there is nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his work, for that is his lot. It's not that we have to like the fact that there is wickedness in the place of justice. And it's not that we can't be a little puzzled and seem a little frustrated, and that it might seem a little absurd that man is going to die just like the beast is going to die. But it is that we just have to accept that's the way it is. There's always going to be wickedness in the place of justice until Jesus comes back. And the fact remains that we're going to die just like the animals are going to die. And so if we will accept that, then we can rejoice in our work. And as he says there in verse 17, there is a time for every matter and for every work. And God will do that on His time. Chapter 4 has several observations that the preacher has made in his search for the answer to his question, what does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? And one of the observations that he makes is that people are oppressed, and that there is no one to comfort them. And so as a result of realizing that people are oppressed and there's no one to comfort him, the preacher makes the observation or the conclusion. He says that the dead are fortunate than the living who are being oppressed, but even better is the one who has never lived. And the reason that individual is better who has never lived is because he has never seen the evil deeds that people do. And then he makes the observation that all toil and skill in work comes as a result of envy of your neighbor. Something like we would say, well, if he can do it, I can certainly do it. And I could probably do it better. Instead of just doing things that are good on our own, we sometimes do good things, if you will, out of envy. We see somebody else doing it, and we think again, well, if they can do it, I can certainly do it. And if they can do it, I can probably do it better than they can. Another observation that he makes is the absurdity of one who spends his time working and amassing riches, but he has no children or brothers or anybody to share it with, and he never asks himself, why am I working so hard? Why am I getting up early? Why am I staying late? Why am I working 6, 7 days a week, 15, 16, 20 hours a week? I don't have anybody to enjoy it with. And he makes the observation, well, that's just absurd. He talks about the strength and the benefit of having someone to be with. Two can lie down together and be warm, and how can one be warm alone? And he makes the observation that a cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. He makes the observation that there was this poor, wise young man who was better than an old and foolish king. And the reason the poor, wise young man was better than the old, foolish king was because the old, foolish king had forgotten how to take advice. But then the preacher noted that eventually the wise young man would be forgotten, and how frustrating that was. Chapter 5 records several more observations of the preacher, and he says, be careful when you go to the house of God. To draw near to listen is better than to offer the sacrifice of fools, for they do not know what they are doing. And so he says, guard your steps when you go to the house of God. Realize where you are. Realize who you are. You're there to worship God, the creator of the universe. And you are one of his creations. And so and another observation he makes is, pay what you vow. It is better that you should not vow than that you should vow and not pay. Be careful what you vow to God. Be careful what you tell other people that you're going to do. It's better not to promise anything than to promise and not do it. Another observation that he makes is, don't be amazed that there is oppression of the poor and violation of justice and righteousness. Again, we don't have to like oppression. We should try to solve it if we can. But the fact of the matter is, there is oppression of the poor. And there is violation of justice and righteousness. And he makes the observation that, don't you understand that if you will, this lower level official is corrupt, there's also higher officials who are watching over that, and they may be corrupt themselves. And so it's unfortunate, but it's just a fact of life that there is injustice at the highest levels. But the people are fortunate when the rulers are honest. Another observation that he makes is, those who love money are never satisfied. If you get a raise and you make more money, then you want even more money. And he noted that the number of their friends increased because of their wealth. And so the more money you have, the more friends you have. You remember some stories about individuals who won the lottery. They realized they had cousins that they had never known about. They had second and third cousins that they had not known about. And again, the more money you have, it attracts more friends and more people. And one of the things that happens as a result of your wealth is they cannot sleep. And so he makes the observation, sweet is the sleep of a laborer, whether he eats little or much. Another observation he makes is, a man who hoards all of his riches, and then he loses them in a bad venture and has nothing to leave his children. And then his conclusion, again, very familiar. Behold, what I have seen to be good and fitting is to eat and drink and find enjoyment in all the toil with which one toils under the sun, the few days of his life that God has given him, for this is his lot. Again, the preacher is not saying that we just need to blindly accept the fact that, yes, there's injustice. Yeah, and just go, well, there's nothing I can do about it. No, there are some things that we can do about it. And we ought not to be blasé and go, well, that's just the way it is. But we do need to accept it. Try to correct it. but understand that we won't be able to completely eradicate injustice, again, until the Lord comes. And wealth is not our Savior. Wealth can't rescue us from our dilemma. And so what he is saying is, realize this is the way that it is. Try to change it if you can. But realize this is the way it is, and that will enable us to eat and to drink and to find enjoyment in our work.